reach their full potential, inspire their teams, drive innovation, and achieve their goals.
In this podcast, we speak to hospital managers, company owners, industry leaders, veterinarians, veterinary technicians, and support staff who are at the forefront of animal health.
On today's podcast, we're speaking with Emily from Boop Veterinary Social Work Consulting about veterinary social work in the veterinary clinic. So, welcome, Emily, our first guest, not to be confused with our other Emily, who is the co-founder of Leading Veterinary Teams. You guys already know us, but if you're new listening, I'm Suzanne Thomas. I am the CEO and founder of Leading Veterinary Teams. Super, super passionate about helping veterinary leaders grow and be who we wish we had. Emily Z, you want to introduce?
Yeah, I'm Emily Z. I am one of the co-founders of LVT. I also am very passionate about coaching veterinary medicine and just really kind of bridging that gap between our frontliners and leadership and trying to see like where that disconnect is. That's where my passion lies.
And our guest for today, Emily. Emily number 2. Tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do in the vet industry.
Sure. I'm Emily Carveth. I am a licensed master social worker in the state of Connecticut, and I'm a veterinary social worker. My company, my passion project is Boop Veterinary Social Work Consulting, where I can work with any veterinary hospital in the country to provide things like team trainings. Some of my courses have been approved for RACE CE, which is really exciting. I can consult with management and team leaders to improve the mental health and psychological safety of their team members. I can help hospitals build wellness programming. So that's my passion project and what I'm doing in the veterinary social work space. And then I am also a practicing therapist.
Awesome. We might have to talk later. Oh my goodness. No, seriously, I think that psychological safety is something that really, really resonates with me as someone who comes from a leadership background and having, worked in places where I personally didn't feel psychologically safe. So it's been super important for me to make sure that when I do manage a team that they feel safe to come talk to me and they feel safe in their environment. Can you talk to us a little bit about what managers can do to ensure that their teams feel safe, especially if they're newer managers and they don't really know what that means?
Sure. I think, oh gosh, that's such a good question. I think there's lots of ways you can go with this. One thing I always think about right off the top of my head is management as a whole at a hospital. Whoever the leaders are working together is making a commitment to out loud share with their staff that they are open to staff asking questions and advocating for themselves. I think especially a lot of the younger folks out there that are new to the field can kind of feel nervous about asking questions out of the fear of making a mistake or feeling like they failed in some way. But really creating a brave space is about sharing with your team members, like, this is okay, this is encouraged. And that really helps lay the foundation that it's all right. It's encouraged for staff members to speak up for themselves and ask for the things that they need. Some folks, may need a different type of work schedule because of perhaps disability or mental health challenges they're having. And that being very clearly stated among leadership can go such a long way. The other thing that I've been thinking about a lot is what we call macro level, and that's at the organizational level, interventions and policies that can really help our team members. So when I say that, I'm talking about things like sick leave policy, bereavement leave, pet bereavement leave specifically, and being willing to make modifications for staff members who, like I said before, may need a non-traditional work schedule based on cognitive challenges, mental health challenges, disability, I think what I would, if I was consulting with any team leader now, I would encourage them to think outside the box of the traditional, say, 12-hour schedule or 8-hour schedule. Some folks may need something very different from that. And I think that's been a challenge for vet leaders in the
Yeah.
past. And I'm excited to see some folks opening up that conversation.
Yeah.
I think for a lot of hospitals, it really starts with the policies that are in
Yeah.
place with the team members.
Yeah, I think that, what resonates with me with what you were just saying as like the first thought in my head was, well, if I have a labor model or if I work for a company that has a model that I have to follow that has, a 7 to 7 and a 10 to 10 shift, let's say, I don't know, I'm just throwing something out there. And now I have to make modifications for somebody. How do I, as a leader, then come and explain to everyone why? I keep using Sarah as an example, but why does Sarah have to get that? And then there's all of these, we have to be sensitive around not pointing out that Sarah gets the 6-hour schedule that's not the same as everyone else. And so I, as a leader, I would be like, crap, what do I do?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's such a thoughtful question and thing to be thinking about. My gut instinct with that is to really involve the staff member in how they would like the information to be shared, what they're comfortable with being shared. There's really, especially when I think about disabled folks, there is a movement in the disability community to really be out loud with your disability and be proud of it because it's nothing to be ashamed of. But everyone's different about what they feel comfortable with. And working with the staff member, making sure that they have agency and choice in that discussion, how those things are shared. Because I can imagine, leaders get questions. People are curious by nature. That makes sense to me.
Yeah.
So perhaps meeting as a leadership team and the staff member, okay, how would you feel comfortable with us communicating this?
Yeah.
I think too, part of that also, to piggyback on what Suzanne says, is we'll have those also employees that are like, well, they're getting that schedule. That's something that I would like to do. I have kids is another thing that you hear a lot of. There's a lot of working moms and dads out there. How would you accommodate them as well when it comes to those kind of things? We know that having kids is a privilege. It's not something that everybody gets to do, which is something that I was also passionate about as a leader, is trying to have my team spend as much time as they can with their kids, even if that meant I had to step on the floor and cover a shift. But it's also hard when they have kids that get sick and those things. So it's kind of pulling away from their sick days and their time off that they're allowed to have. So what kind of accommodations as a leader would you say would be fair, and I'm using air quotes, for those kind of situations?
That's a really good question too. And I'm thinking in real time about this. And I would say, I think for me, it ultimately comes down to how I'm oriented as a social worker is to one of our credos is to meet people where they're at. So I think it involves, and this definitely takes extra work on the leadership team's part, full transparency is having a conversation with that staff member or even workshopping a group of the parents that work at the hospital. What is it that you're looking for in terms of what would be adaptive and generative to still allow you to show up as your best at work and also have some safety in knowing that if your child gets sick, you can, if you need to run home for a little bit and come back, get things set up with the other parent or another caregiver, is there leeway to do that? And I bet that could be challenging in some situations. So it might not be a hard and fast thing, but I would be interested to hear from the staff members themselves of what they would envision that looking like.
I love that in your responses thus far, it's all like putting the onus on the person to be part of the solution, which is kind of, it's not funny, but it's kind of funny because we talk a lot about not having like a no complaining rule and making sure you come to the conversation with solutions, not just complaining and having this like negative spiral. And so I think that, you know, what you're saying resonates with what we've been talking about in another context, but it's relatable and interesting how it all relates. But it's also, you know, important because I think that I'm a parent, and so this makes me think about, you know, how I would be affecting my team if I was working on the floor and I had to go home and I couldn't work for a day or whatnot. And having somebody come to me and ask me, you know, what works for you, I think would make me feel a lot better. And honestly, it would probably help the entire culture of the hospital too, if you're being asked to be part of the solutions throughout.
Sure, that really makes sense to me. It's how I orient myself as a therapist too. I always want my clients to feel like they have choices in their treatment. Like if there's certain modalities that they're really interested or directions they want to go, they can say that to me. They have full access to their treatment notes. If they want them, they just say the word and sign the form. Here you go. So preserving choice creates safety for folks. We know that through social work research. So it makes sense what you all are saying about, you know, let's get you involved in this conversation.
Yeah, I love
You can
that.
be part of it.
Now, I know that there are some clinics that are hiring veterinary social workers to work within the clinic.
Yes.
What first of all, do you have experience in that way? And if you do, what does that look like? Like if I'm a hospital leader and I feel like this is a really important thing to bring to my team, what would I be looking for, and how is that going to positively impact the team?
Yeah, I do have experience in that setting. They're called embedded veterinary social workers, and other mental health disciplines can be hired for a similar role. They just might be called something different. But as I worked for a hospital in Connecticut, a large specialty and emergency hospital. And so I was their one social worker. So right off the bat, if you're a large hospital, I would consider hiring more than one veterinary social worker. It was a lot and still a really like an amazing learning experience for me. So I had a lot of different hats that I wore in the hospital. I would describe myself as any human that comes inside the veterinary hospital could potentially be my client. So I supported both the clients and the staff.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And what that looked like for staff was short-term counseling. I could help them bridge the gap between me and mental health services, whether that was the employee assistance program that we had with the hospital or finding a long-term counselor. I could support them through that. A lot of it was folks coming to me to decompress and have a safe space to vent if they needed to after a really tough day, or if they needed to process a really tough euthanasia or treatment decision that the team had to make that the owner didn't agree with, because that happens a lot. And that can cause something called moral injury in staff members, where when the decisions of the owners don't match what the team members feel is the best clinically, that can really affect someone's sense of morals and sense of justice. And so that was a lot of what I was helping folks cope with. I also did some educational workshops, things like communication and de-escalating conflict. I helped with planning some fun stuff for for the staff. Like we had a chair massage day. That was really fun. That was one of my favorite things that I got to plan. Not every VSW is involved with that aspect of things, but I really like things like planning, like restorative things like that for my team members. So that was great. And then also talking with management about if they had questions about team members, helped mediate conflict between team members and between like teams as a whole. So that was that side of things. And then on the client side, it was mostly supporting the clients who were facing euthanasia, either anticipatory grief. They knew that decision was coming, but they needed some emotional support around that decision, or during, I was able to be present before, during, after euthanasia. I offered to say a non-denominational blessing over their pet after they had passed, and then I was a resource for follow-up support. So sometimes I would do short-term grief counseling. And so that was most of what I did on the client side
Gotcha.
of things.
Gotcha. Yeah, I mean, that's really a lot. I think that there's, and it's great. I mean, I think that in my experience, and Emily, I don't know if you would agree, as a hospital leader, a lot of that stuff has fallen on us. And
Yep.
while I'm a certified compassion fatigue professional, that only goes so far,
Sure.
right? And so I can talk through, grief to an extent. As you know, and most people know, I've been an oncology technician, so death is something that I have unfortunately been around a lot. Emily worked in ER, so there's a lot of death there as well, and just in general in our
Sure.
veterinary business, right? Like a lot of us experience that, as well as just fatigue and stress in general.
Sure.
And so the having that additional layer of support is really, really great. Are you finding that now that you're kind of off on your own and doing this consulting, that you're able to influence smaller companies? Because you said you worked in a larger organization.
I did. Most of my work so far, I'm starting to get Boop off the ground. My bread and butter so far has been trainings, educational workshops. So I've worked with another specialty and emergency hospital in Connecticut. My signature presentation is understanding trauma in the context of veterinary medicine, because in my clinical practice, I work with folks who have survived childhood or domestic violence, lots of trauma. And there's trauma running all through veterinary medicine. So I really wanted to create a workshop that helps the staff members understand what's happening to them in this work and not blame themselves for very understandable reactions that they're having. But the nice thing about my work now is I could work with any size hospital, as long as it's a good fit, and I would have a conversation with their staff leaders about what they're looking for. I can kind of make it whatever they need it to be. The only thing I can't do is do therapy for their staff members. But I could say, if God forbid they needed a short-term grief counselor for their staff members, we know that's a critical need sometimes. I can be that person and help connect their staff members to services. Something I'm working on in Florida is developing a member assistance program for the Florida Board of Veterinary Medicine. So that is still very much in the works. So hopefully more news coming soon.
That's great.
I'm licensed for telehealth in Florida. So I connected with Phil Richmond, who's a veterinary consultant and a vet on the board. So we're working on that piece of things. So I can go lots of different ways with this work.
That's really great, especially, for those listening, in light of, most recent news in Florida. We're recording this in November of 2023. And so who knows, you could be listening to this in 2025 and not having any clue what we're talking about, but there was a recent shooting in Florida in a veterinary hospital. And so I think that is definitely something that's needed. And thank you for doing that. That's amazing.
Yeah, hopefully
Yeah, I
it
think
ends up
it's
being a really
great.
robust thing. Yeah.
Yeah.
So when you are contacted by these leaders that are looking for your services and you are like, yep, this is a great fit, I'm going to come on in and, talk with your staff. How does the support staff take you coming on into the practice?
So far, it's I've only worked, I admit, with one hospital. This is my little baby company that I'm
Mhm.
starting. It was actually a wonderful, wonderful experience. I
Good.
presented my trauma workshop, and I love to teach. It's one of my favorite parts about my work as a therapist and a VSW. And it was fascinating to see the facial expressions and body reactions of the staff members as they were absorbing their content, because I really go into like how the nervous system activates as a stressor and trigger comes in. And like I remember the big moment was sharing with them. I'm like, "Hey, have you ever had a shift where say you're working for 10 hours straight and you've had back to back to back cases and you're going all day and then you collapse when you get home?" And every single person was like, "Well, yeah." I'm like, "Have you ever blamed yourself for that?" And they're like, "Yeah, I'm like, "Don't. This is normal." And so I literally take them through this chart like it's like a roller coaster that can only go up so far and then it's got to come down.
Yeah.
And it was just really special to see okay, this isn't our fault. We're not doing something wrong by wanting to veg out in front of the TV for 6 hours after we get home. It's like, yeah, this is normal stuff. This is human stuff. And I actually was very fortunate to be able to take on some of the staff members as my therapy clients afterwards. And so that is something that I offer if they're inside the state of Connecticut and they want to work with me, then I kind of funnel them over to the group practice that I work for and they become my therapy client. So special.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I think it's really cool what you're doing, because you just mentioned that your trauma workshop and the kind of the work that you do outside of just this space is all around trauma. And I've found that a lot of, like, including myself, that a lot of people in veterinary medicine are brought into, like, we gravitate towards veterinary medicine
Mm.
because animals make us feel better.
Yep.
And it's almost like our own
Healing.
unconscious way of
Mhm.
getting our own therapy, right?
Yep.
And
Hmm.
so a lot of
Hmm.
the veterinary community that I've interacted with have childhood trauma or
Yep.
have situations that they've been through. And I don't know that unless they've actually explored therapy and had some of those conversations, that people realize that some of their, like, visceral reactions to things that
Yes.
happen in the clinic are because of things that happened in the past. Um,
100%.
and I
100%.
personally have a therapist. I was just joking before, and I also don't live in Connecticut. So, but I personally have had to work through some of that stuff, even as a
Mhm.
leader, being able to recognize why certain situations and conflicts within my team make me react the way that I react. And how can
Yeah.
I react? I can't react when I'm in a leadership role, right? I have to be the calm, the one that is
Mhm.
trying to make sure that, this person and this person aren't trying to kill each other.
Mhm.
And it might be a situation that's, like, really
Activating.
affecting me. And
Yeah.
so I think that having somebody like you and having that, like, extra person to bounce those ideas off of, or talk through, or even say, listen, I'm supposed to be the leader here, but this is really affecting me, and I'm a person
Yeah.
too, and I can't
Mhm.
handle this. And having somebody that is able to step in, I think that's a really great thing.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah,
you.
for
Yeah.
sure.
Can't wait to see where this goes. I hope to
Yeah.
go a lot further with this and really start working with management teams,
Yeah.
on the things like policy and psychological safety, because it starts at the top.
Yeah.
It's a trickle
100%.
down. Yeah.
100%.
And you're so right about everything you said about the type of folks that are drawn to the field. We're caregivers by nature. And so many of us caregivers we are working in a way to get our own healing and needs met through service, but that, yeah, it can be difficult to parse out. And sometimes we feel like we're at fault somehow for having these reactions where it's like, no, this is 100% a natural consequence of being exposed to another being's trauma and suffering.
Yeah.
You will experience secondary trauma.
Yeah.
It just
Yeah.
is a given.
It's real. It's
Yeah.
real.
It's real.
It happened.
It's real.
Have you experienced, I know in my like compassion fatigue training, there's a lot about the like putting up those barriers
Mm,
and not allowing yourself to feel, and doing that for so long kind of makes you almost like
numb.
you no longer even
Sure.
realize that this is an animal, and you're
Mhm,
treating it and you're supposed to be caring for it because you're protecting
mhm.
yourself. Have you experienced that, and how do you help people work through that?
Oh gosh, that's a really great question because it's something I've grappled with as a therapist, even
Yeah.
too. It's how do you preserve your empathy without it hurting you? That is
Yeah.
such a big question. I always liked when someone is coming up against this, I really love to let them know about the work of Judith Orloff, who's a psychiatrist and she's also an empath. And she wrote this great book, The Empath Survival Guide, that was like the first glimmer of hope in my own life when I started feeling extremely burnt out and disconnected from my work. Because, yeah, that numbness was setting in. I've absolutely felt it. I worked in the veterinary field for about 15 years before I became a VSW. So I was a vet assistant most of the time. And so I was helping with hundreds of euthanasias. And you're right, after a while, it really sneaks up on you, that disconnection. So one exercise of Judas that I love is thinking of a protective bubble around you. And this may seem silly at first, but it's been really helpful for me. And some of my therapy clients, I teach this to too, where it's like a protective bubble where all of the positive emotions like love and connection and empathy can still come in and out to you, but the negative stuff bounces off. So that's been a helpful image for me to take in when I notice my empathy starting to hurt me, but it also lets me still feel, because I think it's really important to be able to still feel, you know,
Yeah.
still experience the grief and the sadness, but also the joy and the honor that comes with being of service to a creature and their family. It's a mixed bag of stuff. So, but let's feel it all.
Well, I feel super calm right now talking to you.
Yeah. Yeah, I do too. And I was gonna ask a question about like negative empathy, but like now I don't want to like change the mood. But the negative
Sure.
empathy, do you think that goes hand in hand with burnout, or people confusing the two kind of feelings? Because what you were just describing, I personally thought was like me being burnt out and not wanting to be on the floor anymore. But now
Mhm.
I'm starting to feel like maybe it was just the negative empathy that was starting
Mm.
to really creep its way in.
The way I understand it is compassion fatigue and burnout are related but separate. And secondary traumatic stress is the combination of compassion fatigue and burnout. So I like to think of compassion fatigue is because of the caregiving work that we do. It's the bearing witness to another being's suffering can cause symptoms just like PTSD. Whereas
Mhm.
burnout is when we're in an environment that we reasonably feel does not meet our needs. So, like, I think about that a lot for folks who are, say, in a hospital with unsupportive policies. That's my big red flag that I think of. And if you're starting to notice a lot of turnover in your staff, that might be a sign that folks are getting burned out. And it goes back to that psychological safety piece. If people don't feel like they can have their needs met, their professional needs, their personal needs, both of those things, if they feel like they really can't make that happen, then they're probably going to get burned out. But they feel really similar, So compassion fatigue usually heals in a short period of time. Like if you take a week, 2 weeks off, a lot of times folks can come back reinvigorated, whereas burnout takes longer to heal from. Because if you're taking a break, but then going right back into the same negative environment, you're going to get burned out again. So, that's something
And
I
my
think about a
follow-up,
lot.
yeah, that's like a big thing for me, because I see so many people leaving the field because of the
Mhm.
compassion fatigue and
Mhm.
burnout kind of things. But as
Mhm.
leaders, what kind of signs should we look out for with our staff when those kind of things are happening? I know, like you said, high turnover, big red
Mhm.
flags, kind of
Mhm.
starting a little more like burnout. But when
Mhm.
we have, our staff that are starting to become, that compassion fatigue, are there any signs or anything that you've seen, or like?
Yeah. I think when someone's feeling a lot more irritable than you're used to seeing before, that's a big sign. Or if they're a lot more tired than usual, secondary trauma can cause tremendous fatigue. Just like if you had PTSD, it just saps your energy. If you're noticing a lot more arguments starting to happen between team members, that's something to watch out for. And then if team members are starting to isolate themselves, like where maybe they were really friendly and social with their team members, and all of a sudden they don't want to engage in those conversations anymore and are kind of keeping to themselves, that's when I'm always curious, like, what's going on? Is there something going on in their personal life or their professional life where they just feel disconnected?
Yeah, and then
Those are big
would you
things.
just recommend that the leadership have those one-on-one conversations with people to pull them aside and say, "Hey, I've noticed this. What's going on?"
Yeah. Yeah, and I always say with those conversations, lead with curiosity and empathy as much as you can, while still protecting yourself. But curiosity, asking things like it will, like you said, like, hey, I wanted to share some things with you, but I really wanted to get a sense of how you're doing. How have you been feeling at work lately? Have things been a struggle for you? And you get so much information by how they respond. Watch their body language. If they're looking really closed off and they're not making eye contact with you. Now that can vary from person because some folks don't feel comfortable with a lot of eye contact.
Yeah.
If their bodies are really closed off and they're turned away from you, that could be a signal that they're feeling really shut down in some way.
Yeah. The other thing that kind of comes to mind is I'm always kind of turning around the perspective.
Mhm.
We talk to leaders, we talk in the perspective of a leader, but what about the leader?
Mhm.
Let's say in a big corporation or something that has a leader, right? A regional, an
Mhm.
area director,
Mm.
operation or
Okay.
medical, doesn't matter because
Mhm.
we all have people above us in general, that isn't providing that. How would I, as a hospital leader, be able to, and I mean, I could just call you and reach out to you, right? But how am I able to, trying to formulate this question?
Uh-huh.
Um, how am I able to ask my leader for the support? Right. I've worked
Mhm.
in this question, just for some background. I've worked in situations where my particular leader
Mhm.
wasn't giving me anything.
Mhm. Mhm.
There was no support, there was no feedback. I had no idea how I was doing as a leader,
Mhm.
and I was feeling burnt out because of all of the stresses that my team was coming to me from
Sure.
and
Sure.
I didn't know at the time, I didn't have enough leadership skill and background to really know how to handle all of that. And I would go to my leader for some mentorship and some help, what would you say to that person that's kind of in that frontline leader position that
Mhm.
is really struggling themselves and
Yeah.
having a hard time giving the support to their team because they can't even give it to themselves?
Yeah. Oh gosh, that's great. That's such a juicy question. I love it.
I'm full
Um,
of them today.
yeah. I would say if you're the leader and you're going to like your upline leader
Mhm.
to talk about that you're needing extra support, a phrase that I found really helpful when, say, advocating for myself with my practice owner is something that really helps me is, and then lay that out. So, like, for example, I have ADHD. I'm like out loud with it. I've had my own mental health struggles my whole life, and I'm also very anxiously hardwired. So, for me, frequent communication is a really good thing with anyone that I work for. And so, I've said in the past, like, something that helps me is, you know, being able to sound things off of you, or something that helps me is asking if my practice owner sends me a text at like 11 p.m. and I'll ask, is everything okay? That helps me because I know it's not an emergency. I don't my poor little heart does not have to freak out as much as it by default freaks out. Or I can know then, oh, maybe this is something that needs to be handled right away. So maybe it sounds like the question you might be wanting to ask is, something that really helps me is periodic check-ins with you. Is that something that we could set up? Do you have that room in your schedule to make that happen? Because I would love to check in with you just to know that I'm doing okay
Yeah.
and get some extra support.
No, that's great. I think that could even work for, the support staff that is
Mhm.
dealing with a hospital manager who doesn't seem as available.
Sure. Sure. Oh, yeah, that happens a lot because a lot of times, in veterinary leadership, you're pulled in 1,000 different directions, and it might be hard to grab a handful of that person's time. But maybe if there's something on the books every week where you can get a 20-minute check-in, that might go a long way to helping that staff member feel more comfortable in their
Yeah,
position.
for sure. My goodness, I feel like I could talk to you all day.
Oh,
There's
thanks.
a reason
Same.
why I was drawn to reach out. I don't know. I think, there's a lot that we touched on today. I think that what you're doing is incredible, and I can't wait to see you do more and continue to support you and uh yeah, I mean, I'm probably, just so you know, probably gonna cut this part out. But we
Okay.
are we're creating courses and things like that as well. And so I like, the more we talk, I'm like, we could totally do a collab and do
Oh,
something,
yeah.
because I think that that
Mhm.
would be really awesome. But I think to kind of wrap this up, because I don't want to keep you all day, even though I could. Unless, Emily, did you have any more questions or anything else that you wanted
Yeah.
No,
to? Okay.
I think it's great that you're talking about psychological safety. I don't think it's talked about enough,
Yeah.
Mhm.
especially in the
Same.
vet field. A
Yeah.
lot of our leaders that are coming in don't come from the vet field. So they
Mhm.
don't understand the trauma, the PTSD that we have, the fact that the vet field is broken all around. So I think it's like really, really great what you're doing. I'm 1,000% behind this. I love talking about psychological safety. Just in general, to anybody
Yeah.
that will listen.
Same.
But I
Yeah.
think it's really awesome what you're doing. The vet field needs more of you. So how do
Yeah.
we clone you and get you in
Yeah.
every state?
Yeah, seriously, come to New Jersey.
Yeah, come to New Jersey.
We're not that far.
Yeah, exactly. Like, I always put it out there on my website that if people want like an in-person workshop with me, I will go within the tri-state area. I
Love
mean,
it.
I'm kind of thinking beyond that. Yeah, like you want to fly me out, I'll come to a presentation in California. Sure.
100%.
There you
You
go.
know?
Uh-huh.
So I have two
Yeah.
things before we go. One is, if you had one last thing to tell leaders,
Mm-hmm.
what would you tell them?
Also with your staff, let them get to know you as a person. The more they see you as an actual human being and less as just a manager, it's going to help. They need to know you.
Yes,
You
be
know.
vulnerable. Yes.
Yes.
Thank you.
Yes. Please feel free to shed tears sometimes with your people. Laugh, burp, or do silly things. You know, it helps. It
I love
helps.
it.
I self-disclose with my clients all the time because I want them to know me. I don't want them to think of me as this like therapist god that knows everything. It's like, no, I'm just another human having a human experience. I may be a little bit farther ahead on my healing journey, but it's like, so I share all the time. This is what helps me. This is what I've struggled with. So that you know you're not alone with all this.
100%.
That's great.
Yeah.
That's awesome. My therapist and I are friends on Instagram because there's no
Yep.
reason to hide anything. And I'm not gonna lie, there's times where he posts some good memes and I'm like, I'm stealing that. And he's like, I knew you would right away. And like things like that. But it's just easier for me to be able to have that conversation with him more
Yeah.
as a human than
Yeah.
looking at him as somebody that's there to help me in my healing journey
Right.
kind of thing. But like that was all me. I was like, I saw you on Instagram. Can we be friends? He's like, I'm friends with a lot of my clients. Feel free, And I was like,
Yeah.
okay, cool.
Sure.
Like, awesome. Like, as long as you're not weirded out, like, that's not, he's like, no, I think it'll actually like be better for our relationship. And, and it definitely has helped. And, I like to tell vulnerable stories when I would go in as the big person from corporate and do a whole bunch of like presentations and be with teams for like between 1 to 5 days. And I would tell them embarrassing stories that I did like on the floor and stuff. And like, I'm human too. I make mistakes. It happens. But I would also like encourage leaders to do the same thing. And just like when leaders would be bonding with their teams, they're like, yeah, this one place that I worked at wasn't vet med related. They would tell like a story about like how they slipped and fell and, something along those lines. And then they would start coming up with like nicknames for each other and stuff like that. And you can definitely see the difference of the morale in hospitals when leaders are more open with their staff. Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Awesome. And the last is how do we find you? How do we get in contact with you?
Yeah. Let's see, my website is boopveterinaryconsulting.com and folks are able to book a call with me right from the site. I'm also on Instagram at Boop Veterinary Consulting as well. And so I post things like slides from my presentation and some mental health stuff, but mostly like things letting people know when my courses are approved, cool stuff like that. And you can always DM me on that Instagram account too. And then my email is emily@boopveterinaryconsulting.com. And I just welcome people to reach out to me or find me on LinkedIn. So there's lots of different ways you can find me.
I love it. Well, thank you so much for taking the time out to hang out with us today and talk about this incredible topic. I feel like we will have to pull something out in the future and really dive into it because there's just so much. And I started this off saying I don't know a lot, and I feel like I'm leaving this knowing so much more. So thank you so much. And I'm really excited to see how your consulting business grows and see the industry that you're part of, the veterinary consulting industry really impact veterinary medicine, because I think that what you're doing is incredible.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thanks for hanging out. Yeah. Thanks for hanging out. Thanks for everything that you're doing too. I think it's great. Keep up the amazing work. I can't wait to see what you're going to come up with next. But definitely super excited, and I can't wait to do like a deep dive in the near future.
Yeah. And is it okay if I shout out 2 of my colleagues really quickly? So I just want to I always want to thank Christina Malloy at Therapy Unleashed in Massachusetts. She was my inspiration and my model for the model I have now. And then Phil Richmond is my colleague in Florida at Flourish Veterinary Consulting. He's fabulous. He's a DVM himself. So I always just like to pay homage to my friends,
I love it.
who have helped me along the way.
I love
And the third person that I want to give mention to is the person who I literally would not have a career and a life as a therapist and social worker without is my clinical supervisor, Tawana Woolfolk, LCSW, who runs Sacred Ground Institute in West Haven, Connecticut. She describes herself as a soul doula, and that's 100% true. I would not be where I am today without her mentorship and love and guidance. So I just want to thank her from the bottom of my heart.
And we thank her too.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, awesome.
Awesome.
Well, thank you.
Yes. Seriously, thank you
And
so much.
yeah,
Thank you so much.
and we'll talk soon.
Good to
Mhm.
meet you and see you.
Yeah.
Good to meet you too.
I'll see you all
Bye.
soon.
Bye.